Hey there. So I don't usually make cooking videos. I usually make like personality and psychology videos on YouTube. But I've had a number of people ask me about my sourdough process. So I thought I would talk about it today. So I've kind of actually made bread my whole life. Even as a teenager, I was making all kinds of different things like cinnamon rolls and oatmeal nut bread and French bread. And the last little while, I've been doing a lot of sourdough and I've been making a loaf every 2 days. And I find once you get into the routine of it, it's not that hard. It's just sort of like your brain just sort of goes on autopilot. So it's pretty easy to make basic sourdough, just a few ingredients. Anybody can do it. But there are a few tricks if you want to get really good results. So get like a nice oven spring. It's nice and high, really good crumb. But my goal has always been, what is the least amount of work I can do to get the best results? You do have to be home for a couple hours while you're kind of doing these stages. So that is one thing about making sourdough is you kind of got to be around. If you're never home, it's pretty hard to make. So the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I just take the starter out of the fridge and I put it on the counter. Done. I took this out a couple hours ago, so it's ready to go. The next thing you're going to need is a bowl. This is like a 9-inch bowl. I think it's 2.5 quart. And then for me, another important thing is a good scale. I have a couple different scales in the kitchen, but I bought this one because you can actually see your numbers when like a big bowl is on top. So some of the small scales, it's hard to see that. You can still use a small scale. Any scale will work. That's the one I have. And so this is actually another really important thing. It's just a little thermometer, like $12. I'll explain why I use this later, but this is actually the key to getting good sourdough. Okay, so first things first, you just gotta feed your starter. So I'm gonna put little timestamps on the video to show you what time I do this. So I take the starter out of the fridge, let's say at like 8 a.m., and I will feed it, let's say around 10 or 10:30. So let's feed it now, I'll show you. It's a really quick process. So this is just a jar with my starter. This is like a coffee filter with a lid, and that's kind of how I keep it. So I put this on. Generally speaking, I probably start with around 50, 60, 70 grams of starter inside there. And I come along here and I put in 55 grams of water. Okay, I did 59 grams, but that's okay. So then all you have to do is match that with flour. So we're just gonna mix that in now. Just a nice soupy mixture. And at this point, I'll just leave my spoon in there and re-zero the scale. So let's put 59 grams in. Now mix that in. So with the starter, usually I'll just sort of push it down the side a little bit without trying to get these old hard bits. Let's put this back on. Close that up. Put that on the counter for a couple hours to proof up a bit. So another thing I do is I don't go stick this in my sink because this stuff is literally like glue, like this starter. And once it hardens, it's very hard. So you don't really want that in your pipes. So what I do is I take a paper towel and I just wipe the spoon clean before I put it in the dishwasher so it doesn't gunk up the pipes. All right, so the starter has been sitting on the counter for a few hours. You can see some air bubbles in there. That's a good sign. When we open it up, we can see some air bubbles and it looks puffy. It's also risen. Perfect. Really, you just want to let your starter activate. So as long as it looks puffy and bubbly, we're good to go. So turn on your scale, put your bowl, zero it out. All right, we're gonna put 100 grams of starter in here. So you can see it's nice and sticky, and that's a good sign. Nice activated starter. Let's put that in there. So that's 69 grams. Let's get that up to 100. 97 grams. So at this point, I kind of like push my starter back down. So I probably have, 60 grams, 70 grams in there ready to make bread with next time. So then I just put my cover back on the thing, and then throw that back in the fridge till next time. All right, so now we zeroed our scale again. And I like to do a pretty high hydration dough. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. So now we're going to put in 360 grams of water. I like to use purified water so there's no chlorine. 362. If you want to be picky, you can always scoop out extra water with a spoon. 359, 360. So I'm now going to mix the dough, and this is actually a really useful tool. This came with my banneton when I bought it, but it's quite nice. So what I try to do is just sort of stir and chop. Just want to get the starter mix into one nice. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's good enough. So then I leave my tool in there and I zero at the scale. And so for salt, I started around 10 grams when I first made it, but now I'm doing 12 or even 13 grams sometimes. And I feel like that's a little better, like a little more tasty. So yeah, just throw that in. That's 5 grams, 10, 12. I give that another little stir. Get the salt in there. Done. So now we zero that out again. So now I'm going to take my flour. Again, it's just this organic all-purpose flour. And we're going to do 500 grams. So I'm going to take this out of here. So at first I just gently kind of mix it around and get the flour wet. And since your salt is already mixed into the water and your starter, it doesn't have to be mixed that well at this point. So yeah, we're starting to get a little more consistent. And at this point, I grab it kind of like this. That's why I actually like this tool. And you just start kind of aggressively working it and kind of chopping. You're just trying to get all the dry wet. And I'll give it some folds like that just to get all the dry off the bottom. Yeah, starting to look like all dry is the same. Doesn't have to be super smooth yet. I'll come here, I'll get it off, in there. You pull it straight, and start getting this excess dough off. All right, so if you do that correctly, it only should take like 5 minutes. And just throw a shower cap on. These are just from Amazon. They're like food grade shower caps. And now we're going to let that sit for half an hour. So in this Timer Plus app, it's kind of cool. I push start on my dough. So this now tells me exactly how long the dough has been proofing. And you want to start that as soon as you mix. And then so up here, we've got a 30-minute timer that repeats 4 times. So it's 2 hours long. But as soon as I start this, watch. So I hit start. And it's now counting down 30 minutes. So when this hits 0, we're going to do our first set of folds. And so one thing about this is you really want to wash this thing right away, and actually all of your tools, because otherwise it just turns into like glue. So I like to use like a really bristly brush like this. I put it in the sink. So I first wipe it off with a paper towel, and then I can kind of scrub it and just wash it right away. So then it's ready for next time. Okay, here we are at 30 minutes. So you can do this anywhere between 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour if you really want. Let's say you had to leave the house for an hour and a half. It's not the end of the world. You can just take a break and then do it later as well. But as a rule of thumb, I try to do it every 30 minutes, so then it's over within 2 hours. All right, so the first thing I do is get my hands wet. You reach in behind like this, pull it up, and fold. Turn it. And there's different ways you can do this. The first time you do it, there's going to be a lot of folds, maybe 8, something like that, maybe 10. But I kind of pull it up, fold it. Kind of reach to the bottom, fold it. I just went off screen there. As time goes on, with folds in the future, it's going to get stiffer and stiffer as you go. So sometimes I'll pick it up a bit, fold it. And eventually it's going to get kind of stiff, and then you can stop. So it's literally like 1 minute of work. Put your thing back on and leave it for another 30 minutes. All right, here we are 30 minutes later. And as you can see, it's already looking more like dough compared to last time. So the more folds you do, the more the dough comes together. And it actually builds the gluten structure. So when you first start, you could almost just rip it apart. But then as you do this more, it'll get more and more stretchy and have that structure. So at this point, you really just want to do at least 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, got 5 out of that one. Cover it up. Back in 30 minutes. That's it. That's for us. So here we are in our last set of folds. And as you go on, the dough is going to get more and more stiff. And that's a good thing. That means it's taking shape. The gluten structure's forming. And now we got like a nice, smooth, stretchy dough. So one thing you want to make sure when you're doing this is you don't want to ever rip it. I mean, if you do, it's not the end of the world, but ideally you don't rip it. Okay, so now we have to allow this dough to bulk ferment. And the key here is to let it bulk ferment the perfect amount of time. And this is where the temperature of your kitchen really comes into play. So as you're doing your folds, you're probably going to want to check out the temperature of your dough. So let's check out the temperature of this dough. So you put it kind of in the middle. Can you see that? So we're looking around 23.5 degrees Celsius. If I flip that over to Fahrenheit for the Americans, 74 degrees. So you can see here, 23 degrees Celsius, 8 hours. 24 degrees, 7 hours. So we were 23.5. So technically our entire bulk fermentation should take 7.5 hours before we shape it and put it in the fridge. So in this case, we've done 2 hours. So we're probably gonna want 5.5 hours on the counter now. So normally I would just put this on and come back in 5.5 hours. So if you look at this chart here, 27 degrees is 5.5 hours. So you can really speed things up if you can warm up your dough. So I find if I put my dough in the oven with just the light on, so the oven is not on, just the light, my dough will get up to like 28 or 29 degrees. So if I crack the door open and just put the light on for like 15 minutes, my dough will be around 27. So if you put a 21 degree dough in the fridge and a 27 degree dough in the fridge, it's going to take a few hours at least, maybe even more, 4 hours, 5 hours to actually get from 27 down to 21. So it will keep bulk fermenting in the fridge. And that's really the reason for this. And that's why if you have a really warm kitchen, a lot of people overproof their dough because it takes a long time in the fridge for it to cool down. But yeah, so like if you wanted to proof overnight, for example, you could do like, if you had like a 21 degree, like air conditioned room, that's 70 Fahrenheit. Now you got to do it for like 12 hours. So you could proof overnight. So in total, we have to wait 5 hours. Or sometimes I'll start 15 minutes early just because it does take a few minutes to shape. But let's just keep this on the counter now for 5 hours, and then I'll see you soon. Okay, so here we are at 7.5 hours. So you can see how it's almost kind of like doming up a bit. Let's see if I can turn this. That's kind of what it should look like, and it should have a nice kind of soft feel to it. You can see we've got a few bubbles. So our bulk fermentation is over, and now we just have to shape the dough, put it in a banneton, and throw it in the fridge. So let's talk quick about the banneton. I think some people, they try to skip these, but it's actually amazing how well they work. And the reason is you can put rice flour kind of all the way up the sides, and You put your dough in here upside down, so then later you can flip it out right onto your parchment paper. But the nice thing about this is it kind of holds the rice flour in there. Whereas if you use a bowl, it's really hard to put flour on the side of your bowl. So I feel like that's really the main benefit of this. I like to just sprinkle this in. So the next step is to wet the surface of this so that your dough doesn't stick. I like to use water instead of flour. I will also wet this. What is this thing called? A scraper? I forget. But this actually, if you buy a kit with a banneton, often it comes with one of these and also the mixer. All right, so what I want to do is just turn this upside down, and if your dough is properly proofed, it should come out without much sticking. Sometimes I'll give it a little help just to start it, even though if you do hold it here for a bit upside down, it will come out. All right, here it comes. And the sign of properly proofed dough is it should come off pretty clean without leaving much behind. So I wet my hands a little bit again. And what I'm going to do here is actually just push this out into a rectangle. The thing about shaping is you're trying to create surface tension on the back, and that means stretching. And it's actually the surface tension which kind of helps your dough rise up. If it has no surface tension, it kind of just flattens out. So there's a few different shaping methods, and some are easier than others. This one's probably like an intermediate level one, and I'll show you what it looks like. So get a rectangle or a rough rectangle. And now what you're going to do is just fold up the bottom third. So it's like that. So now we're going to stretch out the bottom, and we're creating that surface tension. Fold, fold. And now you can get the top. I like to do the middle, kind of stretch it out and fold it. Do one there, pull this out. And so you've kind of folded, folded, folded. So now at this point, we're going to grab this and do a roll to kind of tuck this all inside. So just like this, roll, roll, roll. And if you had an oval banneton, you could kind of stop there. But since it's circular, I do another bit of a roll here and then kind of tuck it into the circle. And you can already see like how much harder this is. So that means we already have that surface tension. It's not super soft. But now there's a thing we can do to make it even better. And that is I put my hands, you can look us up on YouTube, other places too, but I'm going to put my hands underneath and rotate. And it's going to slowly stretch this dough around and increase the surface tension even more. So here we go. And at this point, it actually kind of helps to have a little bit of a dry counter. And that's why I put just a little bit of water to start. And by the time I get to this stage, it's almost dried. And as you turn this, the counter almost grabs the dough and helps stretch. And the more you do this, the tighter this top gets. And that's really what you're trying to do, is create that surface tension. And this will give you a nice high ball of dough. Yeah, so I think that's good. Grab the banneton. I'll usually just scrape this and then flip it upside down. Wait, can we got that in the frame? Okay, here we go. Scrape that, flip it upside down. So you probably could leave it at this point, but I often try to help the surface tension a little more, and I try to like pull these together a bit. And then pinch. We'll do that like just a couple times. Just try to make this nice and tight. There we go. So you're done. Throw the bag on there, or the shower cap, and then that can go in the fridge. I put it in the fridge for about 48 hours. And so they say you should do at least 24 hours to eat the fructans in the dough, especially if you're fructan intolerant. A lot of people don't even know what that is, but it's a FODMAP. And so my wife, Lexi, doesn't do great with FODMAPs. So we've realized the 48-hour ferment, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it eats 90% of the fructans if you ferment for 48 hours. So I just throw that in the back of the fridge, just like that. Okay, so here is some dough that has been sitting in the fridge for 2 nights. It's in the banneton. So what I do to bake it is get some parchment paper. And then you just want to plop your dough right in the middle. And hopefully it all comes out. There we go. So I try not to really touch it too much at this stage, but sometimes I'll rub the flour in a little bit, and then you kind of get that white look to the bread when you're done. So at this point, you could just throw this in the oven and bake it. However, if you score it, you'll probably get a little more height to your bread, which is nice. In the very beginning, I just would throw it in like this, and then I slowly realized that the scoring actually makes more of a difference than you would think. So you can do a really basic score if you want and just cut a line, or you can do more creative designs. And my wife Lexi actually really loves to do the designs on the bread, so I'll just have her do that now.
Normally, I'll do either an X and do some fun designs on the quarters, or I'll do a big S shape and do some designs on those. But to keep it basic today, I'll just do the X. So I always just do a light trace of what will be my deep cut first. And then I can do smaller designs on these little quarter areas. Most common one are just wheat stalks. And if you kind of just flick your razor on the tips, you'll get some nicer leaf shapes in the end. I'm going to do one for these. I'm going to And then I go back over the deep cuts to make sure that it's a nice deep line.
Okay, so I like to bake in a Dutch oven. It kind of keeps the moisture in, and I think it might make the crust less crispy. So I actually have some silicone in the bottom here, and then I have some loose rice. And so I find that this actually makes the base get cooked less, so it won't be quite as crispy on the bottom. It still is crispy, but if you just put this straight on the bottom of the Dutch oven, it gets really crispy. So let's throw this in. Plop that in like that. All right, got that there. Throw the lid on. And at this point, I'll just throw it in the oven at 425 convection for 55 minutes from a cold start. So that means I just put this in a cold oven, turn it on, 55 minutes later, I take it out. I believe for a convection, you're usually going 25 degrees under. So if you don't have a convection, you may want to bump it up to 450. Anyway, here we go. So I usually try to put it onto a wire rack to cool, and that kind of prevents the moisture at the bottom building up. I feel like for me, the key to a really good sourdough loaf is it pushes up nice and high. And so I think that's a combination of the shaping, not being underproofed or overproofed, and then cutting it. And in the end, I think that looks pretty good. So I find usually you should let it sit for maybe half an hour before you cut it. I find that you can cut an edge piece off, but if you try to cut too soon, it'll kind of squish the loaf down. All right, so this is now completely cool. This is a couple hours after we took it out of the oven. Let's cut it in half, see what it looks like. Looks pretty much perfect.